Bloodstone's secrets. Alex sat hunched over the desk in his chamber. The cursed diary spread open before him. Its pages were smudged with darkened ink, some written in a hurried, frantic hand. He'd read countless historical texts in his career, yet no document had ever unsettled him the way this one did. The words within it seemed to bleed unease, as though the parchment itself resented its contents being known. Every sentence pulled him deeper into the horrors of the Blood Court and its insidious connection to Vlad Tepes. Beside the diary sat his notebook, pages littered with hastily scrawled notes, timelines, sketches of the Bloodstone, and phrases copied from the diary. The text described the Bloodstone as more than just a relic or artifact. It was a conduit, a link between worlds. Alex's eyes skimmed an entry he'd found earlier, the words haunting him as he whispered them aloud. The stone does not grant life. It mocks death. Those who offer blood to the stone may linger, but they do not live. They serve. His pencil stilled on the page. They serve, he muttered, the phrase reverberating in his mind like a curse. The Bloodstone reacts. On the desk, the crude wooden talisman given to him by the village seer rested next to his open notebook. Despite the protections it was supposed to offer, it did little to ease the cold, persistent sense of being watched. Alex's attention drifted to his bag on the bed. Hidden inside, wrapped in layers of cloth, was the smaller box he had discovered in the newly revealed chamber. He had carried it with him after his escape, unable to leave it behind. It pulsed faintly in his mind, a niche at the edge of his thoughts. "Fine," Alex muttered, his frustration overcoming his hesitation. He rose and crossed to the bed, pulling the bundle from his bag with trembling hands. Slowly, he unwrapped the cloth to reveal the box once more. Its surface was smooth and dark, etched with twisting carvings that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. The red light from within pulsed softly, its glow rhythmic, like the beating of a heart. Alex placed the box on the desk beside the diary. The temperature in the room dropped noticeably, and the air grew still. He hesitated, his fingers hovering over the lid. The last time he had tried to touch the Bloodstone, it had nearly overwhelmed him, its force pushing him back against the wall. Yet here it was, calling to him again, as though it knew him now. He glanced at the diary, searching for courage. The diary reveals more. Alex turned back to the diary, flipping to a section he had skimmed over earlier. The entries were dated toward the end of 1477, when Vlad Tepes had fully descended into madness and obsession. The Bloodstone speaks to him now, the scribe wrote. It has shown him what lies beyond the veil, the space between life and death. He claims he can see the souls of the fallen. He says they whisper secrets to him, telling him how to wield their power. Alex's hand tightened on the page, his pulse quickening. The entries became darker and more fragmented, the scribe's handwriting unraveling into illegibility. He no longer fears death. He commands it. He believes the Bloodstone will allow him to ascend beyond this mortal plane, to control the living and the dead alike. The next entry sent chills crawling down Alex's spine. The Count stood at the altar tonight. He offered the stone his own blood, and it drank. The light within it burned bright as the sun, and the shadow appeared once more. It called him master, but this is no victory. The stone hungers for more. I fear it will take him, as it has taken the others. Alex whispered the words again. It drank. The Bloodstone was not an object. It was a living force, one that demanded sacrifice. A strange reaction. As Alex read, the glow from the box beside him intensified, catching his attention. He turned to see the lid trembling slightly, as though something inside was stirring. The hum returned, low and insistent, vibrating through the desk and into his fingertips. Alex stood frozen, his breath shallow. The red light spilled out from the seams of the box, pulsating in perfect rhythm with the beating of his own heart. "No," he whispered, backing away. "Not again." The hum grew louder, more resonant. The diary's pages began to flutter as though caught in an unseen wind, the inked words shifting and warping before his eyes. Alex stumbled backward, knocking over the chair behind him. His flashlight, resting nearby, flickered violently. its beam sputtering like a candle about to die. The room dimmed until the bloodstone's glow became the only light. The whispering returns. The whispers started again. At first, they were faint, like distant voices carried on the wind. But as Alex watched the box, the whispers grew clearer, louder, more urgent. They spoke in the same ancient tongue he had heard in the catacomb, words that twisted and coiled through his mind like smoke. Appariator tenebris. The phrase sent chills down his spine. He backed toward the wall, his hand groping for the talisman around his neck. It was warm now, as though resisting the force emanating from the box. The whispers began to overlap, a cacophony of voices both deep and shrill, though he couldn't understand the words. Their meaning pressed into his mind, pleading, demanding, calling. The bloodstone wanted him. "Stop!" Alex shouted, his voice breaking. The whispers faltered for a moment, and then a single voice spoke clearly, a guttural tone that sounded as though it had been dragged from the depths of the earth. "Offer yourself." Alex froze. "What?" he croaked, his voice trembling. The box's light flared, and the whispers roared back to life. "Offer yourself. Offer yourself. Offer yourself." The force of the bloodstone. Without warning, an invisible force slammed into Alex's chest. He cried out as he was hurled backward into the stone wall. The breath knocked from his lungs. The room spun around him, the bloodstones hummed drilling into his skull. Pinned against the wall, Alex felt the air grow colder still. His vision blurred, red light filling the edges of his sight. The lid of the box lifted slowly, and the bloodstone began to rise. It floated upward, its glow brighter than ever, the pulsing light now blinding. It hovered in the air, a perfect sphere of shifting crimson and black. The whispers converged into a single thunderous chant. Appariator tenebris. The light intensified, pouring over Alex like a flood. He screamed, squeezing his eyes shut as the pressure in his chest grew unbearable, as though the stone were pulling him, trying to tear him from his body. A moment of defiance. In his desperation, Alex's hand found the talisman again, its edges sharp against his skin. He gripped it tightly, focusing every ounce of his will on the rough wooden carving. "Leave me alone!" he screamed, his voice raw. The talisman burned hot in his hand, and for a moment, the hum faltered. The bloodstone's glow flickered, and the force holding him against the wall loosened. Alex dropped to the ground, gasping for air as the whispers retreated into a low murmur. The bloodstone hovered for a moment longer, its light dimming, before slowly descending back into the box. The lid snapped shut with a final, decisive click. The room fell into silence. The aftermath. Alex lay on the floor, his body trembling. The talisman was still warm in his palm, the faint smell of burnt wood filling the air. He forced himself to sit up, his eyes darting toward the box. It sat motionless on the desk, its glow gone, as though nothing had happened. But Alex knew better. He crawled to his feet, staggering toward the diary. The last entries held warnings he hadn't fully understood until now. Warnings of the bloodstone's power and the cost of its awakening. The whispers, the force, the pulling. It didn't want him to run. It wanted him to surrender. Alex backed away from the desk, his mind spinning. He grabbed the talisman and held it tightly, vowing not to let the bloodstone win. Whatever Vlad had unleashed, whatever this was, he needed to stop it. But deep down, a chilling thought gnawed at him. Was it too late? The confrontation. The candle on Alex's desk flickered violently, struggling against a draft that wasn't there. The air felt heavy, charged with a pressure that made his skin crawl. The diary sat open in front of him, the words twisting in his mind, repeating like a cursed litany. The weight of the truth he'd uncovered about the bloodstone, its hunger, its power, its connection to Vlad Tepes, had left him shaken and exhausted. A sharp knock at the door jolted him. Alex's heart leapt into his throat. The knock came again, louder this time, reverberating through the wooden door like a judge's gavel. "Alex," came Mihai's gravelly voice from the other side. "Let me in. We need to talk." Alex hesitated. There was something off about Mihai's tone, an urgency beneath his usually stoic demeanor. The old groundskeeper had always been cryptic, issuing his warnings about the castle like riddles. But now, his voice held an edge that Alex didn't trust. He glanced at the diary and the bloodstones box, still wrapped tightly in cloth on the bed. He felt like a hunted animal trapped in a cage. Taking a deep breath, he shoved the diary into his bag and quickly wrapped the talisman around his neck. "Alex," Mihai's voice was sharper now, almost angry. "Open this door." Alex crossed the room and unlocked the door, cracking it open just enough to see Mihai's face. The old man stood in the corridor, a candle in one hand and his ever-present cane in the other. Shadows flickered across his lined face, and his pale eyes seemed brighter than usual, as though reflecting some unseen light. "We need to speak," Mihai said. "Now," the keeper revealed. Alex didn't move. "About what?" Mihai's gaze flickered past Alex into the room. "You've been reading the diary. I warned you not to go poking where you don't belong." Alex's grip on the door tightened. "What do you know about the diary, Mihai?" The old man exhaled slowly, his knuckles whitening as he leaned harder on his cane. "Too much. Enough to understand the danger you've put us both in." "Us?" Alex repeated. Mihai nodded, his expression hardening. "You think this castle is just history, Alex? Just stone and myth? It's more. It's alive. It watches. It waits. And there are those of us who have been tasked to keep its secrets buried." Alex felt his stomach drop. "What are you talking about?" "I am a keeper," Mihai said simply, "as was my father before me, and his father before him. We are sworn to protect the castle's secrets, and to protect you from those secrets. The diary, the bloodstone, the rituals. You were never supposed to find any of it." Alex stepped back instinctively, the door creaking under his weight. "You knew," he whispered. "You knew about all of this, and you didn't say a word, because you're not meant to know." Mihai hissed, his calm facade cracking. "The castle calls to those it chooses. I've spent my life keeping fools like you from feeding it. But now it's awake. And you've stirred something that should have been left alone." Mihai's motives. Alex swallowed hard, his pulse racing. "If you're supposed to protect people, why are you hiding the truth? Why not stop this madness?" Mihai's face darkened. "You can't stop it. You can't fight it. The castle is older than any of us. It's a wound on this land, and it will never heal. The bloodstone doesn't just exist to feed its hunger. It binds the darkness. If it's awakened, if it's unleashed, there will be no end to the blood it will demand." Alex glanced toward his bag, where the diary sat hidden. "So what happens now? You take the diary and pretend none of this ever happened." Mihai's expression flickered. "Give it to me, Alex. It's not safe in your hands." Alex shook his head, his instinct screaming at him to resist. "You don't want to protect the castle's secrets. You want to keep them for yourself. You're part of this." Mihai's lips curled into something between a sneer and a grimace. "You don't understand what you're talking about." "I understand enough," Alex shot back. "The bloodstone, the rituals, the Watcher. You're keeping it alive." Mihai slammed his cane against the stone floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "You child, I have spent my life holding the darkness at bay. Do you think you can stop this? Do you think you can win against what lives here? I am the only thing standing between you and what waits below." "You're a liar," Alex snapped, his voice trembling. "You're not protecting anyone. You're protecting yourself." The old man's pale eyes narrowed dangerously. "Give me the diary, Alex. Now." The struggle. Mihai stepped forward, forcing the door open with surprising strength. Alex stumbled backward, his heart pounding as the groundskeeper entered the room. The candlelight made Mihai's face look monstrous, his features twisted with anger, his shadow stretching across the walls like a predator. "Stay back," Alex warned, clutching the bag where the diary was hidden. "You have no idea what you're meddling with," Mihai growled, advancing with slow, deliberate steps. "Give me the diary, and I'll keep you safe. I'll fix this." Alex backed toward the desk, his hand reaching for the flashlight. "I don't believe you." Mihai lunged. The old man was faster than Alex expected. He grabbed for the bag, his gnarled fingers clawing at the strap. Alex twisted away, knocking the candle from Mihai's hand. It hit the stone floor and extinguished, plunging the room into darkness. "Stop!" Alex shouted, fumbling for the flashlight. He managed to grab it and turned it on, the beam slicing through the dark. Mihai's face appeared in the light, wild, desperate, his pale eyes blazing with something almost inhuman. "You can't run!" Mihai shouted. "You can't escape this!" Alex didn't wait to argue. He bolted for the door, shoving past Mihai with every ounce of strength he had. The old man stumbled, cursing loudly as Alex sprinted into the corridor. The chase. Alex ran blindly through the castle, the beam of his flashlight bouncing wildly. The stone walls seemed to close in on him, the air growing colder with every step. Behind him, Mihai's cane struck the ground like a drumbeat, accompanied by his angry shouts. "Come back, Alex!" Mihai's voice echoed through the halls. "You don't know what you're doing." Alex ignored him, his breath ragged as he pushed himself harder. He turned corner after corner, the castle a disorienting maze of shadows and dead ends. He swore he could hear other sounds now, soft whispers rising from the walls, mingling with Mihai's furious cries. "They're watching me," Alex thought, his chest tightening. The castle is alive. He sprinted past the grand staircase and into a hallway he didn't recognize. The architecture here was older, the stones darker and covered in cracks. The whispers grew louder, and Alex swore he felt cold fingers brushing against his skin as he ran. He turned another corner and froze. A door stood at the end of the corridor, slightly ajar. It wasn't there before. The whispers grew insistent now, urging him forward. "Appariator tenebris." Alex hesitated, glancing back toward the corridor he had come from. Mihai's footsteps were growing louder, closer. He had no choice. Alex ran for the door and shoved it open, into the unknown. The room beyond was pitch black, colder than ice. The flashlight's beam revealed nothing but a stone floor stretching into darkness. Alex stepped inside, pulling the door shut behind him, just as Mihai's shouts reached the hallway. He pressed his back against the door, his breath ragged, and listened. Mihai's footsteps stopped outside. "Alex," Mihai bellowed, pounding on the door. "You think you can hide from this? The castle will find you. It will take you." Alex stayed silent, clutching the diary to his chest. The pounding stopped after a moment, followed by Mihai's retreating footsteps echoing into the distance. Finally, silence returned. Alex turned, his flashlight trembling in his hand as he pointed it into the darkness. The room seemed endless, the beam of light swallowed by shadows. The whispers had returned, faint and far away, their meaning unclear, but their intent unmistakable. Something waited for him here, something the keepers had hidden, and Alex was closer to it than ever. The descent into the sacrificial chamber. The door slammed shut behind Alex with a final, deafening thud. The sound echoed through the darkness, as though the castle itself had sealed him in. The flashlight trembled in his hand as he turned slowly, its beam barely cutting through the oppressive blackness. The room stretched out before him like a void, its silence broken only by his ragged breaths. Something about this place felt wrong. It wasn't just the cold. It was deeper, a kind of unnatural chill that seeped into his bones and tugged at his very thoughts. The whispers he'd been hearing were quieter here, but more insidious, like a chorus of voices murmuring just out of reach. Ahead, the stone floor was uneven, broken in places, with grooves that ran like veins across its surface. As Alex swept the flashlight across the room, he noticed something horrifying, dark stains filling the grooves. At first, he thought it was dirt, but as the light hit them, the faint glisten told him otherwise. Blood. His stomach turned. What the hell is this place? The room revealed. The flashlight's beam crawled up the walls, revealing more of the chamber. The stones here were blackened and pitted, almost as though they had been burned, and carved into the surface. Covering every inch of the walls were symbols, spirals, jagged lines, and grotesque figures writhing in torment. Some symbols he recognized from the diary. Others were more elaborate and far older, their meaning lost to time. But it wasn't just the carvings. As Alex moved further in, The walls themselves seemed to bleed. Dark rivulets seeped from the grooves in the stone, trailing downward like fresh wounds. He reached out a trembling hand and touched one of the streaks. It was warm, viscous, and real. Alex stumbled back, his flashlight skittering across the room. The whispers grew louder. Appariator tenebris. No, Alex muttered under his breath, wiping his hand frantically against his coat. This isn't real. This can't be real. But it was. The air around him thrummed with energy, a deep, invisible vibration that rattled his teeth and made the fine hairs on his neck stand on end. The altar of sacrifice. As Alex swept the light across the center of the chamber, he found it a massive stone altar. It was carved from the same blackened rock as the walls, its surface covered in deep grooves and channels that all led to a basin at its base. The grooves were caked with dried blood, and the basin, though empty now, looked as though it had held gallons of the stuff. Alex's flashlight flickered, the beam dimming as he moved closer to the altar. His breathing slowed, his body suddenly heavy, as though the very air around the altar had weight. He felt like he was being pulled toward it, like gravity itself was stronger here. On the face of the altar, another engraving, the Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail, its circular form framing a single word written in the same ancient language he'd seen before. Tenebris. Darkness. Alex swallowed hard, his throat dry. The altar, he realized, wasn't just a place of sacrifice. It was a conduit. The grooves carved into the stone floor stretched out from the altar, forming a vast pattern, one that mirrored the carvings on the walls. The design was deliberate, ritualistic, meant to channel something, and it had been used. Often. The growl from below. Alex stepped back, his flashlight catching something at the base of the altar, a small, blackened crack in the stone. It was no wider than his hand, but it stretched downward into what seemed like endless darkness. The edges of the crack were rough and broken, as though the stone itself had split apart. As he crouched to look closer, the whispers stopped. The silence was sudden, absolute, and suffocating. Then, a sound emerged from the crack. A growl. It was low and guttural, a sound that seemed to reverberate from deep within the earth. Alex froze, his entire body going rigid as the sound rose in pitch, becoming more feral, more alive. It was followed by a faint, rhythmic thumping, like something huge and heavy shifting far below him. He scrambled back, his flashlight slipping from his grasp and clattering to the ground. It spun wildly, its beam flashing across the walls and ceiling in frantic arcs. The carvings seemed to move in the light, twisting and writhing as though they were alive. The figures in torment silently screaming for release. The growl grew louder, closer, vibrating through the floor. No, Alex whispered, crawling backward. No, no, no. The walls close in. The chamber itself began to feel smaller, the walls pressing inward. The bleeding grooves grew darker, fresher, as if the room itself were feeding. The stone beneath Alex's palms felt slick, warm. The flashlight stopped spinning, its beam now frozen on the altar. For a moment, Alex saw something move in the crack. A hand. It was thin and pale, its skin stretched tight over elongated bones. Clawed fingers gripped the edges of the crack, pulling. The growl became a snarling, guttural sound as the thing in the darkness began to climb upward. Alex's scream caught in his throat as he scrambled to his feet, slipping on the wet stone. The talisman around his neck burned against his skin, growing hotter the closer he got to the altar. The growling grew deafening, shaking the walls. Blood streamed freely now from the grooves, pooling around the altar and spilling toward Alex's feet. The carvings glowed faintly red, as though responding to the presence that was now clawing its way upward. Escape! Move! Alex gasped, his voice a rasp as he forced his legs to obey. He turned and sprinted toward the door, slipping and sliding on the blood-slick floor. The beam of his flashlight bounced wildly ahead of him, cutting through the suffocating darkness. Behind him, the growl became a roar, a deafening, inhuman sound that shook the very foundation of the castle. He didn't dare look back. He could feel it, something massive and ancient crawling up from the depths. its hunger spilling into the air like a wave of cold death. The whispers returned, chanting furiously now, their voices rising in a crescendo that vibrated through his skull. Aperiator tenebris! Aperiator tenebris! The door was ahead, an outline barely visible in the dark. Alex's shoulder slammed into it, and for a heart-stopping moment, the door refused to budge. "No!" he screamed, pounding his fists against it. "Let me out!" The talisman flared against his chest, and with a groaning crack, the door gave way. Alex tumbled forward, landing hard on the stone floor of the corridor beyond. He turned and shoved the door shut behind him, just as something slammed into it from the other side. The impact was so powerful it rattled the stone walls, sending dust raining down from the ceiling. Alex scrambled backward, his chest heaving, his vision swimming. The growling continued on the other side of the door, a low, rumbling sound of frustration. Slowly, it began to fade, retreating back into the depths of the chamber. The whispers quieted. The corridor fell still. The aftermath. Alex sat against the cold stone wall, his hands trembling as he pressed the talisman to his chest. It was still hot, as though it had absorbed the energy from the chamber. His flashlight lay on the ground, its beam sputtering faintly. He reached for it with shaking fingers and shone it back toward the door. The stone was cracked and blackened, as though something had burned its way through from the other side. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. What the hell is this place? The diary had spoken of sacrifices, rituals, and a hunger that could never be sated. But now Alex understood. The bloodstone, the rituals, the Watcher, they weren't just legend. The castle itself was alive, its foundations a prison for something ancient and malevolent. And he had woken it. The growl still echoed faintly in his ears as he staggered to his feet. He didn't know how much time he had, but one thing was certain. He had to uncover the truth before it was too late, before the thing beneath the altar found a way out.